Welcome to Hard Script.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. It happened in the middle of a restaurant. Not a fight, not a scream, just one sentence that cut cleaner than any betrayal ever could. Honestly, I think we're better without intimacy. It just complicates things. She said it casually, like we were discussing dessert or the weather. Her tone was flat, disconnected, like she'd already rehearsed it. Maybe even told someone else before she told me. The table between us felt colder after that. I didn't say a word, because there was nothing left to say. And in that moment, I realized something she hadn't. The end doesn't always begin with cheating. Sometimes it starts when someone looks at you and says, "I don't need to feel close to you anymore." That was the first fracture. Lexi and I had been married for 5 years. Not perfect, but consistent. Structured. Organized. She liked to say we were a well-oiled machine. What she really meant was efficient, predictable, low maintenance. And slowly, over time, I stopped being a person to her and started becoming a function. She stopped kissing me goodnight, stopped reaching for me in bed, stopped laughing at my jokes or telling her own. But I stayed, because I thought love was supposed to endure the slow fade. I thought marriages went through phases. I thought maybe if I gave her space, she'd come back. But that night in the restaurant, she handed me clarity in one sentence. We're better without intimacy. Better? For whom? Because I sure as hell wasn't better. I was becoming invisible, one compromise at a time. And the worst part? She didn't say it to hurt me. She said it because she didn't think it mattered anymore. That night, I didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't ask her why. I just looked at her and nodded. Then I reached for my coat. And somewhere between the appetizer and the check, I made a decision. If I was no longer a part of her closeness, then she'd no longer be part of my presence. No warnings. No discussions. No second round. She drew the line. I just made sure she felt what it was like when someone steps back permanently. She erased the connection. So I erased myself from her bed and her future. 3 days passed after the dinner. Lexi acted like nothing had happened. She moved through the house like she always did, polished, polite, predictable. She asked if I'd pick up groceries, reminded me about her dry cleaning, and left her empty coffee mug in the sink for me to wash. Like always. Like routine. But I wasn't playing along anymore. I answered when necessary, nodded when required, and spent more time in silence than ever before. I didn't confront her. I didn't beg her to explain. Because I already knew. If she could say something like, "We're better without intimacy," to my face with that kind of calm. It wasn't spontaneous. It was premeditated. What I didn't expect was the confirmation to come from someone else. A week later, I ran into Tyler, an old friend of ours, more hers than mine. We crossed paths at a gas station, of all places. He looked uncomfortable the second he saw me. Asked how I was doing. I said fine. He paused, then said something that sat with me long after he drove off. "Didn't think you guys were still together, man. Lexi's been acting real, free lately. Hope you're okay." That was it. Nothing direct. No accusation. Just a crack. But it let the light in. And that's all I needed. Free. That word played on a loop in my mind. Free from what? From me? From the obligations of a marriage she no longer respected? From having to pretend she saw me as a man worth touching? I didn't ask Tyler anything else. I didn't ask Lexi anything either. I just watched more carefully after that. The phone she kept face down. The late night drives to clear her head. The sudden interest in fitness classes with no visible results. Patterns. I'd been sleeping beside a stranger for months. But now I was seeing her clearly for the first time. And clarity doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it just stares you in the face until you're forced to act. So I did what any man should when he realizes he's being slowly erased. I stopped trying to prove my place. And I started planning my exit. Quietly. Strategically. Because when someone shows you how little they feel, you don't ask why. You just remove the part of you they stopped valuing, before they think they can come back and find it again. I didn't need a confession. I needed confirmation. And people who lie, they rarely notice when you stop reacting. That's when they get careless. I started small, just observations. Times. Patterns. Passwords she never bothered to change. Lexi was consistent. That was her mistake. Her habits told stories she never intended to share. Like the fitness app on her phone, one she hadn't touched in months. Yet her step tracker suddenly spiked every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Except she wasn't at the gym. She was 20 minutes away, near a residential complex I'd never been to. I didn't follow her. I didn't ask. I just waited. Pulled our shared bank statements. Sorted every line. There it was, rideshare receipts to the same block. Repeated. Patterned. Timed like clockwork. She was methodical. I had to respect that. But method doesn't protect you when someone's paying attention. Her texts were locked down. But her email? Not so much. She hadn't logged out of the shared laptop in months. Inside the promotions tab was a trail. Confirmations for restaurant reservations I'd never attended. 2 seats. Always for 2. One of them was 3 nights before the restaurant moment. The one where she said we were better without intimacy. She'd sat across from someone else just days before that conversation. And now she was sitting across from me, calling it an upgrade. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so surgical. But I didn't let anger touch me. Not anymore. When you see the truth laid out like numbers, like time stamps, like receipts, it doesn't spark rage. It sparks detachment. I screenshotted everything. Not to confront her, but to prepare. Because men like me, we don't scream. We document. We build a case no one sees coming. That night, I sat in bed beside her. She was scrolling, smiling at something I wasn't part of. I looked at her and realized she wasn't even trying to hide. Because she thought I'd never leave. She thought silence meant surrender. But I wasn't quiet because I was weak. I was quiet because I was done. So I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and laid there, wide awake. Already gone. Just not physically. Not yet. The morning I left didn't look different from any other. That was the point. Lexi stood by the counter, pouring coffee into her favorite mug, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary. She didn't look up when I walked past. She didn't notice the small black duffel bag in my hand. She couldn't have guessed that inside were the last things I'd take from this house. By noon, I had opened a new bank account. One she didn't know existed. Direct deposits rerouted. Joint savings emptied down to the last dollar I had a legal right to take. No notes. No explanations. By 2, her name was removed from every bill I could strip her from. Electricity. Internet. Even the streaming accounts she claimed were hers. I kept the passwords. By 3, my phone number changed. The old one went silent. And by the time she came home from wherever she'd been, her hair a little too perfect for a midday meeting, I was gone. Not just gone from the house. Gone from her day, her reach, her certainty. She called my old number. Straight to voicemail. She sent texts. No delivery receipts. She emailed. No reply. I let the silence settle like a weight she couldn't push off. That night, I knew she was pacing. She'd never been good with things she couldn't control. But this wasn't about control. This was about absence, and how it speaks louder than presence ever could. The next morning, a mutual friend messaged me. Lexi's worried. Can't reach you. Everything okay? I didn't answer. 2 days later, she showed up at my office. She was told I no longer worked there. That wasn't entirely true, but the person at the front desk didn't know that. I'd made sure they didn't. By day 3, her social media posts shifted. First, subtle quotes about needing space. Then, pictures with wide, forced smiles. I recognized the panic behind them. This was the thing she never understood. When a man like me goes silent, it's not because he's broken. It's because he's already somewhere else, mentally and emotionally. And when you remove yourself with precision, there's no trail to follow back. I watched her panic grow from the safety of distance. She had no idea where I was or who I was with. That was intentional. She thought silence was weakness. But silence was the strategy. Because the real damage isn't done by shouting, accusations, or scenes. It's done by leaving someone alone with the echo of their own choices, until that's all they hear. And for the first time in years, I was enjoying the quiet. Distance wasn't the endgame. It was the opening move. The more space I put between us, the more desperate she became. And desperation makes people sloppy. On the 5th day of silence, I got my first breadcrumb. Not from Lexi, but from a name I recognized. A man named Derek. I'd seen it once before, buried in a rideshare receipt. This time, it came from a mutual acquaintance who didn't even realize they were giving me a gift. They mentioned Derek in passing, said he was good at making connections, and always had a side hustle. In my world, phrases like that usually meant someone was hustling more than just business. That night, I opened a separate laptop, one Lexi had never touched. I started pulling public records. Derek's last name gave me his business registration. His business registration led me to property filings. And those filings? They led me to debts. A lot of them. It turned out Derek had a habit of borrowing from people he shouldn't, then pretending those debts didn't exist. Even better, some of those people had the kind of reputations that didn't forgive easily. I didn't need to ruin him. I just needed to put him in a position where Lexi couldn't stand beside him without feeling the heat. So I made a few anonymous calls, sent a few anonymous envelopes. Nothing traced back to me. Just enough information in the right hands to start a slow burn. Within 48 hours, Derek's name was coming up in the kind of conversations you don't want your name in. Not criminal charges. No, this was quieter, nastier. Rumors about bad deals, unpaid tabs, double crosses. The kind of whispers that follow you into every room. I didn't check on Lexi directly, but I didn't have to. The same mutual acquaintance posted a photo from a weekend gathering. Lexi was there, but Derek wasn't. She was standing with people I knew she'd barely spoken to before, smiling too hard, looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to walk in. I wasn't finished. Not even close. By day 7, Derek's business listing had been flagged for possible fraudulent activity. Not from me directly, just from the chain reaction I'd started. And the beauty of it? Lexi wouldn't know my fingerprints were on any of it. To her, it would look like Derek's own mess catching up to him. The man she thought was her escape hatch was turning into a liability. And liabilities are heavy to carry when your social image matters more than anything else. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to say a word. I was making her watch her better option collapse in real time, without ever stepping into the frame. Because the coldest revenge isn't taking someone down yourself. It's making sure they have no one left to stand beside. And Lexi? She was starting to stand alone. The thing about secrets is, they're heavier in public. When no one's watching, you can pretend they don't exist. But when eyes are on you, when people start talking, they become impossible to carry without breaking posture. Lexi prided herself on control. She could walk into any room and make it feel like she belonged there, even if she didn't. But lately, the rooms were changing. The smiles she used to get had turned into those thin, polite versions people use when they're just waiting for you to leave. I didn't have to sabotage her directly. Derek's slow unraveling did the heavy lifting. Word about his debts and bad deals had traveled farther than I expected. It wasn't shouted, it was whispered. Which is worse, because whispers travel without a trail. The first real crack came at her sister's engagement party. I wasn't invited. Not by her choice, by mine. My absence was part of the plan. Photos started appearing on social media that night. Lexi looked perfect, as always, but the background told a different story. She was never in the middle of a group, always on the edges. And in one video, her sister's fiancé made an offhand comment while raising a glass. To loyalty, the one thing you can't fake. It got a laugh from most people, but not from Lexi. She glanced at the camera, then away, like she felt the weight of something only she could hear. 2 days later, I heard from another mutual acquaintance, different circle this time. They told me, without prompting, that Lexi seemed distracted lately and wasn't her usual self. Translation, people noticed. The truth is, I didn't care what she felt. I cared that the cracks were visible to everyone else. Because once perception shifts, reputation follows. And Lexi's entire identity was built on how she was seen. She tried to overcompensate, posting more photos, attending more events, smiling harder. But it only amplified the contrast between her curated image and the unease in her eyes. I watched it all from a distance. Not gloating, just observing. The best part? Every piece of this collapse looked like it had nothing to do with me. There was no confrontation, no blow-up. Just the slow realization on her end that she was no longer untouchable and no longer surrounded. By week 3, she'd stopped mentioning Derek entirely. Not to me, not online, not even to her closest friends. It was as if erasing his name might erase the mess. But messes don't disappear, they spread. Lexi was learning that lesson the hard way, and I wasn't offering a hand. She had always been so sure she could keep her world separate, that no matter what she did, she could keep her public life pristine. Now, she was finding out what it feels like when the ground shifts under you, and every face in the room looks like they know something you don't want them to. And I hadn't even played my final card yet. Isolation isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with slamming doors or dramatic exits. It comes in the quiet moments, when you reach for someone and find only air. Lexi had always been surrounded. Friends, co-workers, family. She built her world like a fortress of constant connection. But now, one by one, the walls were crumbling. Not because I pushed them over, because she leaned on them and found they couldn't hold her anymore. I saw it in the little things first. Fewer calls during the day, less laughter echoing from her end of the house when she was catching up with friends. Her phone stayed face down still, but now it rang less often. And when it did, she walked out of the room before answering. Not with the confidence of someone hiding something, but with the shame of someone who knows there's nothing left worth showing. The gym trip stopped. The fitness classes vanished from her schedule. Derek's name hadn't crossed her lips in weeks, but his absence was louder than any confession. She was moving through her days like a ghost who hadn't realized she was dead yet. I didn't step in to fill the silence. I didn't comfort her. I didn't even acknowledge it. That's the thing about emotional distance. It works both ways. When someone decides they don't need you, the cruelest thing you can do is agree with them. I still moved through the house, still ate at the same table, still passed her in the hallway. But my presence was neutral, almost professional. No arguments, no affection, just a quiet, deliberate refusal to engage. It drove her mad. I caught her watching me sometimes, like she was searching for a crack in the armor. I gave her nothing. No reaction to her subtle digs, no response to her accidental mentions of people she ran into. I didn't even ask where she was going when she left, because I didn't care. That's when she started trying harder. Not to fix things, Lexi never worked in that direction, but to reestablish some kind of pull over me. She'd linger in doorways when I was on my laptop, make half-hearted small talk over dinner, even sit on the couch while I watched TV, pretending to scroll through her phone. The irony was perfect. For months, I'd been invisible to her. Now, she was the one standing in the background, hoping for my attention. But the thing about being truly done is you don't go back. I wasn't ignoring her to punish her. I was ignoring her because she no longer existed in the space I lived in. She was just there. And if she thought the silence was unbearable now, she hadn't seen what was coming next. Because the final act wasn't about making her regret losing me. It was about making sure she couldn't find me again, even if she tried. She chose a Tuesday night. The kind of night where nothing was planned, where the silence between us was so thick you could almost see it. I was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher, when I heard her footsteps behind me. Slow, measured. She leaned against the counter and said, "We need to talk." Months ago, those words would have pulled me in. Now, they were just background noise. I didn't even pause what I was doing. I just said, "About what?" without looking up. She hesitated, as if she expected me to fill the space with my own questions. I didn't. I let her stand there in it, struggling to gather the courage for something she should have said a long time ago. Finally, she asked, "What's going on with you? You've been different." I almost laughed. Different? That was her word for it. I'd been dismantling my life with her piece by piece, and she was only now realizing she wasn't part of it anymore. I told her, "Nothing's going on. I'm fine." My tone was flat, unshaken. She searched my face for something. Anger, hurt, anything she could grab onto. But I'd made sure there was nothing left to take. That's when she shifted tactics. She tried to play the part of the concerned wife, saying things like, "We haven't been ourselves lately, and maybe we can fix this." But the words rang hollow, even to her. I didn't remind her that she'd been the one to declare we were better without intimacy. I didn't bring up Derek, or the rideshare receipts, or the dinner she'd had without me, because none of that mattered anymore. When you've already left in your mind, you don't argue about the past. You erase it. So I told her, I don't think there's anything to fix. Not as a threat, not as an accusation, just as a statement of fact. The way her expression fell told me everything. She'd expected resistance, a fight she could win, or at least an emotional reaction to prove I still cared. Instead, she got the kind of calm that says the decision has already been made. She asked if I was leaving. I didn't answer. I just went back to stacking plates in the dishwasher like she hadn't spoken. And that silence, that deliberate refusal to confirm or deny, was worse for her than any yes or no could have been. Because in that moment, she realized she no longer had control over the timeline. She couldn't predict when or how I'd go. She only knew one thing for certain. When I did, I wouldn't be coming back. The look on her face was the first sign she finally understood. She had already lost me. By the end of that week, she wasn't hiding the panic anymore. I could see it in the way she hovered when I moved through the house, her eyes scanning my face like she was trying to read an unfamiliar language. She'd ask small, empty questions. Will you be home later? Or, do you need anything from the store? And every time, my answers got shorter. Lexi had always been a master at keeping up appearances. But now, even in public, the cracks were showing. She'd walk into a room, and the air wouldn't bend toward her the way it used to. Conversations would stall when she joined them. People would exchange quick glances, the kind they think you don't notice. I didn't have to lift a finger. The web she'd spun for years was collapsing under its own weight. Derek was out of the picture, completely. From what I heard, his business partners had turned on him. Debt collectors, lawyers, the whole thing. If she'd been his escape, she was now another liability he couldn't afford. That left her with no one. And that's when the desperation set in. She started bringing up memories from better times. Like revisiting them would somehow resurrect what she'd buried months ago. She'd say things like, "Remember that trip to Napa?" Or, "We used to laugh so much." But her voice would falter halfway through, like even she couldn't believe the words. I responded with polite nods. Nothing more. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was gone. The version of me she'd dismissed, the man who stayed up late to make her laugh, who bought her flowers without reason, who fought for her when things got hard. He'd been replaced by someone she couldn't reach. And she hated it. The more she reached, the less she got. The less she got, the harder she tried. But it was all a feedback loop leading her deeper into frustration. I didn't celebrate her unraveling. There was no satisfaction in watching her lose her grip. But there was clarity, a kind I'd never felt before. She'd built her control over me by making herself the center of my world. Now, she wasn't even in the frame. And in the quiet of that realization, something shifted permanently. I knew exactly when I'd leave, how I'd leave, and what I'd take with me. It wouldn't be dramatic. It wouldn't be loud. When it happened, it would be final. Because the end of us wasn't going to come from a fight. It was going to come from a door closing behind me. One she'd never have the chance to open again. The morning I left wasn't special. No date worth marking, no storm outside to match the moment. It was just a clear, cool day, the kind where the sun hits the blinds in sharp lines, and the air feels lighter than it should. Lexi was still asleep when I stood in the doorway, looking at her one last time. I didn't feel rage, or pity, or even nostalgia. Just the confirmation that I'd been gone long before this morning. My bag was already in the car. Documents organized. Keys ready. The house was clean, almost staged, like no one had ever really lived here. I didn't leave a note. Notes invite questions. Notes are an opening. I wasn't leaving one. I walked through each room in silence. The dining table where she'd delivered her sentence, "We're better without intimacy," still stood in the same spot. The couch where she'd sat scrolling through her phone while I lay awake beside her. The kitchen counter where she'd once tried to explain herself, too late. Every piece of furniture was a landmark in the slow erasure of us. When I reached the front door, I paused, not to second guess, but to make sure the moment stayed burned in my mind. Because this wasn't just me leaving her. This was me leaving who I'd been with her. No one would see me walk out. No audience. No final words. Just the sound of the door latch sliding into place. I got in the car and didn't look back. Not once. By the time she woke up, the house would feel different. Not emptier, just colder. She'd noticed the missing clothes, the gap on the dresser where my watch used to sit, the silence where my coffee maker used to hum. Maybe she'd call. Maybe she wouldn't. It didn't matter. My phone was already off. I didn't disappear. I didn't vanish into nothing. I simply stopped showing up in a place where I was no longer respected. And that's the thing about silence. It doesn't announce itself. It just grows, day by day, until it's all that's left. For her, that silence would be unbearable. For me, it would be freedom. Because leaving isn't always about slamming doors and shouting matches. Sometimes, the most powerful exit is the one no one gets to witness. I'd lived my last chapter in her presence. From here on out, my story would be mine again. and she would have to live with the one truth she could never undo. I was never coming back. Drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe. This is where we talk about what doesn't get forgiven.